Over the past 3 years, a spotlight has been shown on the Chinese Communist Party's bio-warfare program. And regardless of whether the COVID virus itself was a part of that program or not, the fact remains that the Chinese Communist Party has a large-scale and very viable bio-warfare program in place, of which the Wuhan lab was just a small component. And one of the most shocking things that we know they are developing is a biological weapon that can target and attack the DNA strands specific to certain racial groups. Now, obviously, that sounds very conspiratorial and something like out of a science fiction movie. But what's truly shocking about it is the fact that it's true. The Chinese Communist Party is indeed developing weapons that target specific race and ethnicity markers, which might all of a sudden make it a bit more clear as to why the Chinese Communist Party has been able to stitch together the largest collection of American DNA profiles in the world, even larger than what the U.S. government has been able to collect. They've done this, by the way, not only through good old-fashioned hacking, but also through more, you can say, traditional channels, such as purchasing the data from DNA sequencing companies. But sometimes they don't even have to purchase the data. As an example of what I mean by that, this right here is BGI, one of the largest manufacturers of prenatal tests around the entire world. And wouldn't you know it, this Chinese company, according to reporting from Reuters, has been sending the genetic data of pregnant women from 52 different countries over to the Chinese military. Now, you might be wondering and asking yourself, what use does the Chinese military have for this type of data? And the answer is unfortunately rather simple, and it has to do with a certain concept called precision medicine. Now, the positives of precision medicine are rather obvious. It's sort of in the name. If a doctor has information about a person's genetic makeup, then they can tailor their treatments perfectly to that individual person. As an example of what precision medicine looks like in practice, well, in the year 2004, scientists at the University of Wisconsin, they injected what they called naked DNA directly into the veins of lab rats for easy access to the muscle cells. Here was an excerpt from the research paper from the scientists at the University of Wisconsin. Quote, "In the experiments, the scientists did not use viruses to carry genes inside cells. Instead, they used naked DNA. Naked DNA poses fewer immune issues because, unlike viruses, it does not contain a protein coat, hence the term naked, which means it cannot move freely from cell to cell and integrate into the chromosome. As a result, naked DNA does not cause antibody responses or genetic reactions that can render the procedure harmful. The injections yielded substantial, stable levels of gene activity throughout the leg muscles in healthy animals, with minimal side effects." The lead scientist in that group then noted that, quote, "We detected gene expression in all leg muscle groups, and the DNA stayed in muscle cells indefinitely." Meaning that scientists can take specific genes or specific proteins and then inject them into just the right cells based on that cell's DNA makeup. Now, whatever your thoughts are on gene therapy, at the very least, these Wisconsin-based scientists do appear to be doing this research for benign purposes, to tailor the strands of DNA for specific individuals to treat specific diseases. However, listen to what a colonel within the People's Liberation Army, listen to how he described this exact breakthrough in gene therapy that took place over in the University of Wisconsin. Quote, "University of Wisconsin scientists have made exogenous naked DNA and injected it into veins for easy access into muscle cells for gene therapy. By combining this knowledge and particle gun technology, we could create a microbullet out of a 1-micron tungsten or gold ion on whose surface plasmid DNA or naked DNA could be precipitated and deliver the bullet via a gunpowder explosion, electron transmission, or high-pressured gas to penetrate the body's surface. We could then release DNA molecules to integrate with the host cells through blood circulation and cause disease or injury by controlling genes." That, on the flip side, is rather hostile, and it's also not theoretical. Because for one, as a part of China's 5-year plan regarding precision medicine, they made a specific point to mention that while they will be collecting the world's DNA, no one should be allowed to collect Chinese people's DNA. Here's specifically what they wrote under a subsection called Regulations of the People's Republic of China on the Management of Human Genetic Resources. Quote, "National security focus includes special limitations on foreign access. Foreign organizations, individuals, and their institutions established or actually controlled shall not collect or preserve human genetic resources in China within the territory of our country and may not provide human genetic resources of our country abroad." Meaning that while they collect the world's DNA, no organization is allowed to touch the DNA of Chinese people. Furthermore, the Chinese state has dumped a massive amount of money into these precision medicine programs to the tune of about $9.2 billion. Compare that, by the way, to America's precision medicine initiative, which saw only an initial investment of $215 million. Meaning that China has pumped in at least 43 times more money into these programs than the U.S. And that's, by the way, only the money that we know about. And China, it's worth mentioning, is not like a normal country with a clear separation between the private sector, the government, and the military. Instead, the reality is that if it's in China, all of it belongs to the Chinese Communist Party. And so, keeping that in mind, let's take another quick look at what that colonel in the People's Liberation Army said about the future of weapons that the Chinese state is currently developing. Quote, "Humaneness in the conduct of war has become the focus of attention recently, and weapons of mass destruction are banned to reduce casualties. The times call for new kinds of weapons, and modern biotechnology can contribute to such weapons. In the near future, when military biotechnology is highly developed, modern biotechnology will have a revolutionary influence on the organization of military power with its more direct effects on the main entity of war, human beings. Modern biotechnology offers an enormous potential military advantage." Meaning, in short order, that while we here in the U.S. are busy devoting our national conversations to pronouns and which specific bathroom a person should be using, the Chinese have put together a giant database of American DNA, and they're currently developing bioweapons that are capable of targeting people based on their DNA, such that, theoretically at least, they could take out an entire ethnic group without any damage to the surrounding environment. Now, while I was over in Washington, D.C. just last week, I had the opportunity to sit down and speak about these DNA-based weapons with Mr. Gordon Chang, the author of the seminal book, The Coming Collapse of China. And he described to me how, based on his research, these ethnic-specific pathogens, meaning pathogens that can target specific ethnicities, could essentially leave China as the world's only viable civilization. And so smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and take a listen.
With that data, they are developing what they call specific ethnic genetic attacks. This was written in a landmark article in the Chinese National Defense University's publication, The Science of Military Strategy. These are attacks that are going to leave the Chinese immune, but sicken and kill everybody else. And this is, it's striking when you think about it. But Jason Crow, who's a Democratic senator from Colorado, last year at the Aspen Security Forum actually talked about how it is now theoretically possible to develop a pathogen that will kill just one person. So the science is really evolving. And if you want to find the biggest collection of DNA profiles of Americans, you're not going to find it in America. You're going to find it in China. And that's what they're doing. And also, they have artificial intelligence. The more data you put into an AI system, the better it is. And so they're feeding all of that data into that. But specifically, they are looking at developing pathogens that will be civilization killers.
So with regard to the DNA-specific bioweapons that they're developing, is that just theory? Or do we know that they're actually implementing at least the testing and development of these types of bacteria or viruses?
No, this is not theory because they talk about what they're doing. And of course, we saw what happened at the Wuhan Institute of Virology with coronavirus. That looks like a biological weapons program. You got to remember that December 2019 or January 2020, Beijing sent its top biological weapons expert, Major General Chen Wei, to head the BSL-4 unit at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And I believe her job there is to clean up evidence of any biological weapons program. So I don't know that, but that's the logical inference. So really what we're talking about is a biological weapons program, which is well along the path.
When you just said that, it kind of a light bulb went off in my mind, where it seems like what happened in Wuhan with the coronavirus laboratory, that being accidentally released, at least that's the assessment of many people now, including high-ranking officials in the government, that seems to have been just an accidental, essentially warning shot, like, hey, we have this one facility here that happens to be a coronavirus lab, but we have perhaps other labs that we're also testing other drugs. We just don't know about them because none have escaped thus far. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, I mean, the Wuhan Institute of Virology is not the only biological weapons lab that China has. At that time, it was the only BSL-4 unit, so it was clearly the most important of the labs, but I don't believe it was the only one.
Here is a short addendum to the interview wherein Josh, who is another journalist here at the Epoch Times, was able to ask a few follow-up questions regarding these DNA-based weapons.
In 2017, China's National Defense University, in its authoritative Science of Military Strategy, actually wrote an article about a new type of biological warfare of, quote, specific ethnic genetic attacks. Now, Bill Gertz of the Washington Times actually has reported that American officials believe that the Chinese are actually working on such pathogens. And the Chinese themselves have been very open about it because for at least a half decade, a little bit longer, they've been actually talking about these ethnic-specific pathogens. And that's why I talk about a civilization killer, because this could end up leaving China as the world's only viable civilization, because all non-Chinese would be either sickened or killed by this.
What would the interest of the CCP be in, as you mentioned, using a civilization killer on much of the world if they were to kill all, say, non-Chinese or people of any one specific racial background, because of course that's targeting DNA strands or changing viruses to target specific DNA strands. I guess one big question would be, why would they do that? What would the interest be for them?
They would be able to rule the world. We know that the Chinese have imported the notion of comprehensive national power, CNP. And CNP is a Soviet concept that is a collection of metrics to rank countries according to their power, and China wants to be number one. Now, there's two ways to get to be number one. One of them is you can strengthen your own country, and every country should be doing that. And the second is you weaken everybody else. And I think that Xi Jinping, after he saw what the coronavirus did to devastate China, then decided that he was going to weaken everybody else. Because by weakening everybody else, he could actually increase China's CNP ranking. And that is the maliciousness of the Chinese system.
Now, with the idea of making bioweapons targeted at specific DNA strands related to racial groups, I know a lot of people might say, oh, that sounds too sci-fi for me, it sounds too far-fetched. How could we prove that that's a viable approach to making biological weapons?
Well, all we have to do, Josh, is just to read what Chinese military researchers say. We don't have to speculate about this. I think that this would be a hard task to do, but we do know that certain racial and ethnic groups are more susceptible or less susceptible to certain pathogens.
How is this possible? I guess, what would you tell people in terms of how is this possible?
Well, it's just possible in that our DNA of humans is alike, but there are differences. And so, for instance, my wife comes from Hong Kong, and she told me, during flu season when she was growing up, Chinese people would get flu, but either they didn't get it or it was very, very mild. But the flu did affect the British and other foreigners in Hong Kong much more severely. And so that is something that is an example of what can happen. And you can weaponize that. So China's working on this, and they're devoting money, they're writing about it, speaking about it, which means that we've got to be concerned that they'll eventually find something. Now, as I said, I don't know what the state of their development is, but we do know they're working on it.
Now, you mentioned something interesting, which is that you said that China, the Chinese Communist Party, has the largest data bank of American DNA, even larger than what we have in the United States. I mean, how did they get this? How did they collect this?
That's a great question, and they did it a number of ways. So, for instance, they bought the company Complete Genomics, which had a large database of DNA profiles of Americans. Also, there are about 13 or so, or 23 or so Chinese-linked companies that are accredited to do DNA profiling and sequencing of Americans. So, if you go to an ancestry company, chances are your DNA is being sequenced by a Chinese company. And the third way they do this is they just hack. They just steal. And that's why I think that they were going after, for instance, health insurance companies and others. So there's a number of different ways they can do this. Oh, and one other, and this we really should talk about. We have these technical cooperation agreements between American research institutes and Chinese ones. So, for instance, Johns Hopkins has one. So there they get it above the board. But through many different ways, they're collecting the DNA profiles of Americans.
So you're mentioning private businesses, ancestry companies processing DNA data in China. academic cooperation programs, all these things. How is this allowed to happen? Is it that we don't recognize this as a threat? Is this just seen as academic research or business? How is this being allowed to happen?
That's perplexing to me, but there's this view that's been prevalent for a long time that we should cooperate with China, and so therefore we did not impose rules against cooperation of this sort. And that means, especially after COVID-19, we should be cutting off all of these linkages. We should be severing them immediately because this is a national security matter. Remember, we've got about 632,000 Americans that have been killed by this disease.
Now, I remember during the Trump administration, there was something really interesting that took place along these lines, which is they made restrictions on U.S. military personnel from using a lot of these ancestry-like programs. And a big question came up, why would they care whether American soldiers or troops try to find out what their racial backgrounds are using these ancestry programs? But a lot of China watchers did point to the fact that the dad was being processed in China as maybe a reason for that. Do you remember that assessment, and do you remember what the reasoning was behind that?
I don't know what the stated reasoning was, but we certainly wouldn't want China to know the DNA profiles of the American military. And it's not just the American military we should be concerned about. We should be concerned about the DNA profile of every American, because China can develop diseases that will hobble our society. It's not just the people in our armed forces that are important. It's every American.
And when he had opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth beast say, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was Death, and hell followed with him. And power was given unto them over the fourth part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth.